ultimately it's becoming more like God. Let's try that again. Hey everybody, welcome back to our series Difference Makers, where we've been talking about how you can be a difference maker, whether it's in your school, community, home, wherever you're at, for Jesus Christ. And we've been talking about different ways and different things you can do to become a difference maker. The first week, we talked about how difference makers have to step outside of their comfort zone. They don't let comfort dictate their decisions, but they let faith dictate their decisions. And then last week, whether you were at youth group and we talked about this a little bit more, or whether you watched the previous video where I sat down with Leslie Stone and we talked about the importance of being in a community. People who make a difference have people in their lives. They have this community around them. And tonight what I want to do is, before we dive into the topic, before anything, we need to talk about heroes. Because heroes are everywhere in our culture right now. There's this big emphasis on heroes, specifically superheroes. But I want to go back even like further back than that. And I want to talk about really the origin story of heroes. When we think about popular heroes, who are some ones that we think of? Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter. I tend to, because of growing up with Disney in the 90s, I tend to like fall on Simba. And, you know, or you can even go even further back. You can go to Lord of the Rings. You can go all of these different things in our pop culture, these different symbols, these different heroes, these different people. And when you really look at their stories objectively, when you just pull yourself out, they seem to be very similar. In fact, there was a guy named Joseph Campbell who thought the same thing, and he wrote this book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And there were a couple things that he noted generally with, you know, the story of what he called the archetypal hero. And that is that they start out in the ordinary world. Everything's fine, everything's ordinary. And then they get this spur call to adventure. They get a call to action. Eventually they go through trials and hardship and whatever they have to do in order to accomplish their adventure. And then they go through a time of growing, and a time where they become stronger, and a time where they learn, and a time where they become the hero that they're going to be at the end of the adventure, when they finally, you know, accomplish whatever that goal was. But there's one thing that I left out intentionally, is that oftentimes, in fact, most of the time, the vast majority of these stories, there is an older, wiser mentor who comes in and aids our hero along the way, whether it's an actual physical, or sometimes it's like this, you know, supernatural, mentor that comes in. Luke Skywalker had Obi-Wan Kenobi. Simba had Mufasa. Harry Potter had Dumbledore. You think of the Hunger Games. Katniss had Haymitch. There's so many different heroes who have somebody in their lives who they're investing in. The recent Spider-Man movies had Tony Stark. Is something that comes to mind. They have an older, wiser mentor, someone who's pouring into them and investing in them. And I'm here to tell you today that in order to be a difference maker, you have to be discipled. You have to have somebody who has been around the block to encourage you and to push you further and farther in your faith than you were previously. And this is interesting, right? Because I think a lot of the times we think that we have to do it alone, or being a difference maker is what I'm doing. I'm the difference maker. I'm the one who's doing all of this stuff, when in fact, there's probably somebody behind you who's pushing you, encourage you. And I have no doubt that you could be an incredible difference maker, but what would it look like if you had somebody behind you who was pushing you and encouraging you? And those moments where you felt like giving up or felt like you couldn't do it, they were coming alongside you and encouraging you and still pushing you to become a difference maker. It would be huge. One way that we're going to say it tonight is by telling you that you need to have a Paul in your life. When it comes to Paul, Paul was he was one of the most influential people in the entire world. And here's one easy way that we know that he was influential that is because he wrote the majority of the New Testament. He wrote a huge chunk of the New Testament, like a huge giant chunk. In fact, a huge chunk of the book of Acts is dedicated to his life. And then we go into his letters, and these are like, people who are reaching out to him saying, hey, I need some help. And so Paul was writing them letters and addressing these issues and the things that were going on in his day. But one thing that Paul was known for was having people underneath him that he was investing in, that he was pouring in, and that he was equipping to do amazing things. The easy one to go to is Timothy. In 1 and 2 Timothy, we literally read letters from Paul to Timothy about things that Timothy was going and dealing with in his church. And so when it comes to our lives, we need someone like Paul. But what does that mean? What should I even begin to look for? Well, there's a great verse in Colossians that addresses this. Colossians 1:28 says this: we proclaim him being Jesus, warning and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we may present everyone mature in Christ. So through this verse, there's three things that we can look for. First off is someone who proclaims Jesus. Okay, it talks about we proclaim him being Jesus. We need people who are not afraid to talk about Jesus. Someone in your life who knows Jesus intimately, who cares about Jesus, who has a healthy, just spiritual life. They read God's word. They pray regularly. They worship. They're a part of a church. They're a difference maker in themselves. We can't just have any Joe Schmo off the street telling us how to make a difference. We need somebody who is rooted in doing the things that we want to do already, so that they can encourage us in what we want and desire to do. Second thing is we need people who are in our lives giving us wisdom. It talks about how he warns and teaches things in wisdom, and we need people like that. We don't just want to surround ourselves with people who say yes to everything we want to do, right? Like imagine you wake up one day and you just want to do something incredibly dumb, and that person just comes alongside you like, yeah, man, that's great. You should do that. No, we need people who can speak real to us. The book of Proverbs says that a fool is right in his own eyes, but a person who seeks wise counsel is full of wisdom. It literally spells it out for us. People who are in jail probably thought what they were doing was right at the time in which they committed the crime. People who get caught in a sin probably thought it was okay what they were doing. They thought they were right in their own mind. But to have somebody in your life who's feeding you wisdom and telling you about the things of life that they know about, that you haven't experienced yet or know about yet, is huge. We need people in our lives who are being smart and being wise and speaking truth into our lives. And then the third thing, and this is incredibly important, is this. We need somebody who keeps our spiritual maturity in mind. We need people in our lives who are speaking into our spiritual maturity. We need people who are looking at our lives and asking about how our devotions are with God, how our personal time is with God. We need people who are checking in to see if we're growing, see what we're learning, see what we're doing, see how we're living it out, like to check in on us if we're not at church or if we're not, doing actively being a part of things. We need people in our lives who care deeply about where we're at in our relationship with Jesus. It's not just a matter about people who are there for us, in our time of need, but really are there when we don't need them, who can come in and ask us, the hard questions and not avoid the conversations that we might avoid. And so we need people who are like that in mind, who love Jesus, who are wise, and who are willing to step in and check in on how we're doing spiritually. Which means, what about us? We talked about what do they look like, but what about us? Well, tonight I'm telling you that you need to be fat. The first one is you need to be faithful. Let's say you're sitting here, you want to be a difference maker, you want someone to come into your life. You need to be faithful. When you say that you're going to meet with them, meet with them. If you say that you're going to, chat with them and ask for accountability, ask them. It has to fall on you. You have to be the one who makes it a priority. Second is you have to be available. You have to make time for these things. You have to make sacrifice. We can find a million reasons to stay busy, whether it's, our studies, whether it's our sports and extracurricular activities, whether it's just coming up with excuses for whatever it is. I mean, you can honestly skip church. You can honestly skip a meeting with somebody. You can avoid all of that purely under the guise of just sitting at home and not wanting to do it. And so you're just scrolling through TikTok and you're just bored and you weren't doing anything. But we weren't any the wiser, right? You made that decision. So you have to be available. You have to be willing to make that time. Put away some of the things that might distract you in order to make that time available. Look at your schedule, look at your calendar, and make that time available. And then the third thing is you need to be teachable. Faithful, available, teachable. It doesn't make any sense if you ask for help and then when somebody offers it to you and then you turn around and you don't take it. You have to be willing to do that. You have to have somebody who comes into your life who's willing to teach you, but you also need to be in a spot in your life when you can receive that with humility and say, you know what, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I do need this help. And I'm telling you, if you allow someone to come into your life to speak real truth, real wisdom, to give you that insight that you might not know, you will be the better for it. Luke needed Obi-Wan, right? Simba needed Mufasa. Harry Potter needed Dumbledore. These great heroes couldn't do what they do by themselves. They needed someone to push them and encourage them along, and we hope that for you. Next week, we conclude this series, Difference Makers, with probably one of the most important messages of all. So really, we hope to see you next week here, whether you're watching on YouTube, social media. I'll see you guys next week.